we have up today is Congress looking to give away its war powers and basically give the president a blank check to make war with China over Taiwan. This was an op ed published in the Washington Post by Representative Elaine Loria. And one of the reasons that this is significant is that this op ed is backing, I think, a largely Republican uh, bill that's being pushed called the Taiwan Invasion Prevention Act. And so there's a couple good articles on this at Responsible Statecraft. That's the Quincy Institute, one by Elizabeth Beavers, and then the other one by Michael D. Swain. And the Beavers article I have up here first. But basically, she is saying that, Representative Loria is saying that it's an issue that the U.S. government doesn't have the president doesn't have the power to just defend Taiwan with military force whenever he wants and would need presidential authorization to do so. Of course, this is specifically the way the Constitution was written, that it was meant that if the United States was going to get into a war, that Congress had to give express approval for that, and that the president can't just go and create any kind of conflict at once. Now, Beavers points out, and this is, I think, the most important part of her article, is that this is completely unneeded because we live in 2021 and not, right after the Constitution was written, and maybe there was still some thought that, Congress really would have to pass active wars. But, in this day and age, it doesn't happen. Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani. Obama overthrew Gaddafi in Libya and created the hell state that they have there now. We've, target all kinds of groups across the Middle East, always claiming that they're the, 2001 AUMF that we're using for this, even if the groups that we're attacking are actually directly opposed to Al Qaeda linked jihadists. So it's all completely insane how war powers currently works in 2021, and this bill is completely 100% unnecessary. But if the Congress did move forward with it, one of the real issues would be is if you had a president who just perceived that for whatever reason, whether it was bad intelligence, whether the president was paranoid, whether maybe there was some real or partially real threat, maybe it was a misunderstanding, whatever. If the president thought that China was going to invade Taiwan, that they could just use military action without getting approval from the Congress, as should be in the Constitution. If anything, what Congress should be doing right now is passing bills that specifically say that the president cannot go to war, or just repealing the current AUMFs and passing resolutions that specifically cut against things like the War Powers Act and make it very clear what the constitutional and the original intent of the founders were when they wrote the Constitution and gave Congress the war-making abilities. Wasn't that, so the president could go start an offensive war and they get approval from Congress later, or carry out a massive drone war on two continents, two of the world's largest continents, all the way from Africa to the Philippines, and pretend like this is something that Congress has given approval for, or something like that. This needs to be reined in by Congress, not the other way. Now, the Swain article goes through, and I think the most important point in here is just that this shows the utter lack of understanding that Congress has for foreign policy. So they pretend like China could just launch a surprise attack, like, one day tomorrow, without a military buildup at all. China would just be able to go and invade Taiwan, pull essentially a Pearl Harbor, except they take and occupy the island. Where if China really did want to launch an offensive war against Taiwan, it would take a huge amount of assets, and it would ultimately involve a very large military buildup across the Taiwan Strait from China. Maybe not exactly right. There would be, other assets deployed to other areas, but essentially you would see them moving into position. A naval blockade can't be established overnight if China doesn't have the military assets in the proper positions to do so. And so, just on the face of it, what Representative Loria is saying is just utterly stupid. And again, just goes to show how little Congress understands foreign policy whatsoever. Um, but Swain goes through and made some other important points in here. But I think the main thing that I want to stress that I actually got from a recent episode of the Scott Horton show, where he interviews the great Peter Van Buren, who is known for being something of a like an Iraq war whistleblower, because he worked for the State Department and wrote the book We Meant Well, and exposed how the U.S. humanitarian intervention in Iraq after Iraq War II was actually causing more harm than good. But really, he spent most of his career in Asia, involved in diplomacy and everything like that. And one of the things that he makes very clear in the interview is just, we're not on the cusp, and it would be very, very unlikely for China to just go and launch a war against Taiwan because of the cultural ties between China and Taiwan, and so many people in each country viewing the people there as their kinsmen. This would be equivalent to a civil war, and I think the U.S., especially in the U.S. media and the way Americans look at it, is almost like Iran and Iraq, where a war could break out any time, and these tensions always exist. And while there has been tensions between China and Taiwan for decades on end now, and a lot of that fueled by the United States, and especially in recent years, all the military support and the military buildup that we've had around Taiwan. It's important to remember that unlike Iran, Iraq, this is a situation where everybody feels that they're kin, and that makes it far less likely that they would go to war. And I'll link to and really recommend that episode of the Scott Horton show. Peter Van Buren, as always, is absolutely brilliant, and the way he articulates from his experience in the region how unlikely it would be that a war would break out. Not, I guess, necessarily some kind of larger conflict, but that China and Taiwan would go to war with each other. And it seems to me that the real risk here is the U.S. and China ending up in some kind of conflict. Now, let's just say Representative Loria, I think, got what they wanted here, which was a more firm U.S. military commitment to Taiwan. I think the U.S. is now in a position where the more military assets it commits to Taiwan, the more China will respond by building up militarily across the strait, and also just to develop more and more military capabilities to counter that. And so the more the U.S. escalates, the more it's going to feel like it can never turn down. So once we had 2,000 troops there, we can never go back to having 1,000, that kind of situation. Because going backwards, China has since put more military capabilities in the region, and so then it would put Taiwan at a greater and greater disadvantage. And that's one reason I think this is a real trap the U.S. could get sucked into. And I don't know about war breaking out anytime soon, but at the very least, us wasting a huge amount of money, and potentially some small conflicts or something like that erupting even from misunderstanding or mistakes. Let's see. One other thing here on China. The U.S., this from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The U.S. accuses Cambodia of a lack of transparency over Chinese construction. There is a military base, a naval base in Cambodia, the Ream Naval Base, and the U.S. has long been accusing Cambodia of allowing China to build a secret naval base there, and Cambodia has always denied this. Recently, the Center for the Strategic Institute, Strategic International Studies, I think CSIS, put out a report. Center for Strategic and International Studies put out a report that claimed that, from the satellite footage, that there was maybe some questionable things being built by the Chinese military there. And so now the U.S. is claiming that Cambodia has a lack of transparency. I mean, my big issue here isn't whether China is building a military base or not, but it's that the U.S. has absolutely no responsibility role whatsoever in telling China what to do, or Cambodia what to do, and what kind of ties they could have with China and what China is going to do in Cambodia. This is the furthest place on the planet from the U.S., and it couldn't be less important. I'm guessing that the amount of Americans that could find Cambodia on a map is probably not much better than they do with a country like Iran. So it's just obviously not of importance to the American people. All right, let's